All right, welcome to today's webinar where we're going to talk a little bit about modernizing mainframe reporting and how we can ease that process for you utilizing PropelZ. And we'll maybe touch on another approach too, depending on what your needs are with some of our products. We can generally cover just about any mainframe data access need that you have across our product set. So let's just review a little bit of our agenda here. I am Dustin Froyum, one of the co-founders of VirtualZ, and today I have Vince Ray, our CTO and co-founder, helping me present this. How are you doing today, Vince?
Oh, I'm great. Great to be here. Looking forward to the call.
Yep, back at it again. This is being recorded and will be available for playback on our YouTube channel, which you can find on linked directly from our website. Or also we have a podcast called Skyward Data that's available on any of the podcast platforms, and we make all of these available there as well. If there's questions along the way, please drop those in the Q&A tab in Teams here, and we'll be glad to do that. We'll monitor chat as well, just in case a question comes through the chat log as well. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges with legacy mainframe reporting, and then we'll talk a little bit about how we help address that and some considerations around our solution and how we can make that more cost-effective and easier and accelerated through your project, your life cycle, what you're trying to do. And then we'll review pricing, we'll have some Q&A, and then we'll be out of here. So a little bit about kind of the challenges we often see in the market around this. So I don't think it's any secret to anybody, but there's pressure on mainframe skills and teams, one, to prioritize work, and also just some of the kind of the dwindling workforce in that area. And so we want to make sure that we're making it easy, not only for mainframe teams, but bringing other skills in from your other distributed and cloud teams, your DBA teams that can help with this challenge. Obviously, some of the legacy approaches around how you help migrate and move data can be a little bit clunky and pretty involved. Vince and I have come across a lot of projects that take a very, very long time just to address the data, and we'll talk a little bit about how we can help in that space. Also costly data movement. So some of the other manual or commercial products on the market are very, very mainframe resource intensive, and so those take up valuable, online or batch processing windows, or and also cost a lot of money to run those in your general processing environment. And then obviously the disaggregation of your data and your reporting. So if you have separated mainframe data and mainframe reporting separate from the rest of your AI, BI, and reporting platforms, that can be really a struggle to bring those together. And so one of our big goals is to disrupt that disaggregation and really bring a single pane of glass view to all your data, including your mainframe data, wherever you want it. And then obviously complex migration processes, which I talked a little bit about, people implementing really complex change data capture or other manual processes that take a lot of maintenance to maintain. So Vince, let's start just a little bit with the architecture and how we help solve some of these problems for our partners and customers.
Yeah, no, and this is probably the real key value prop to our PropelZ product. What we've built with PropelZ is something that knows how to access just about any type of mainframe data on the input side. And then on the output side, it's really open, but it can communicate to almost any database, no matter where it is, no matter what platform, really no matter what protocol. I mean, typically we talk about JDBC connections to target databases, whether it's in the cloud or on-prem or whatever it is. But there are dozens and dozens of different targets that we can reach this way. And what PropelZ does is gets your mainframe data into these different environments in a really easy to use way. Instead of here's a blob of data that used to be on a VSAM file, we can transform that. We can break that down into rows and columns. We can normalize the data. We can push that out wherever you want it, or maybe even to many places if you need copies in multiple places. And then that makes it so much easier for whatever you want to use for reporting in BI to access that data. So transformation, and often if you look at these kind of products, the products who that do the transformation, the hard part is that transformation piece. How do I go from this ugly VSAM file that's encoded in EBCDIC, and it has mainframe style floating point numbers and packed decimal and all these other things that are not very common on other platforms. How do I get that into something a little more understandable by, let's say an Oracle database? Well, in our case, we make that as easy as it possibly could be. And we allow you to specify something as simple as a COBOL copybook that says, here's the layout of my records. And most mainframe sites are going to have that kind of thing. So you get to just reuse what you got, tell us, here's a description of my data. And you're pretty much done with that. That's kind of what leads to the productivity here. And I mean, Dusty touched on the another important point that we hear a lot about, incremental update. In other words, I might have terabytes of mainframe data that I need synchronized with something in, let's say the cloud, or whatever target database I want. A lot of folks go into change data capture architectures for that, and frankly, that many of them regret it, because that tends to be really complicated and operationally difficult and all of that. So, we can do that too. We take a slightly different approach, though. Our approach is an asynchronous one. So we know that uh, the data might be a few seconds out of date, 5 seconds, a minute, whatever your needs are, but it completely decouples any application you got that's updating the file from the targets. So there's no kind of slow down there. There's no performance penalty there. There's even tolerance of network outages and things like that. If there should be a network glitch, just restart PropelZ when the network is fine. And, we keep right on going where we left off, and everything gradually gets back into sync that way. So, really makes that idea of, I've got this, let's say VSAM file on ZOS that I want to synchronize to, whatever target database. And if I update a record or delete a record or whatever I do on the mainframe, I want that target to stay totally synchronized with it. Makes it so much more practical to do that in the technique that we use. Other things I'll mention here are, I mean, there are a lot of use cases, as Dusty hinted. One is, sometimes you want to use PropelZ in almost an interactive way. You might have, we used to call them power users, semi-technical end user who has no issue, type in this command line and you'll get your data where you want it to go. I mean, we support that. Certainly, PropelZ is so simple, it can be used like that in a totally ad hoc way. Can also be integrated in things like your production batch jobs. You create a file, maybe add a step, or use your job scheduling software to run a step after that synchronizes the data to the cloud wherever you need it. So, lots of different use cases there, depending what your needs are. And then, one of the other things we're proud of is that, at the lower levels in PropelZ, we're using protocols that are kind of designed for distributed access to databases. A lot of our competition in this space, they do things like, web services, HTTP transactions, which are, not always the fastest way to do this sort of thing. HTTP is a text-based protocol for the most part. It implies a certain amount of connection overhead and on and on and on that way. With PropelZ, we're using things like industry standard JDBC, which is a protocol that's evolved over the last few decades to be super efficient with binary data, database queries, that type of thing. So as a result, even on really slow connections, we tend to see pretty reasonable throughput this way. In our test environment, and let me be clear, our test environment's teeny. We're talking about ZOS running on a ZPDT system connecting to something hosted in AWS on a free tier, so a very tiny target. And in that configuration running Postgres with nothing more than consumer grade internet connections, we get roughly about 6,000 rows per second of insert capability. So, when we think about the practicality of doing this stuff, I mean, sometimes you've just got so much data, it could be a month to, move it across the network. PropelZ is about as good as it's going to get. That way, it takes advantage of, not just the mainframe, but whatever network capacity you have, whatever the target can do, and so forth.
Yeah, and Vince, I think that's a good topic to touch on because you can run, we get this question a lot in some other use cases like tape migration, or, backing up data, moving large amounts of data. So Vince, you can run PropelZ on concurrently on many LPARs, many sysplexes, whatever you need to do. Is that right?
Oh, sure. Yeah, you could, absolutely run as much PropelZ as you have resources for.
Yeah.
So, and I don't think it's uncommon, especially with mainframe customers. A lot of times the target is on-prem. It's a, I don't know, Microsoft SQL Server database that's in a, rack mount server that's in the same room as your mainframe. And in that case, your network probably screams, and go for it. Will really have great throughput in that kind of environment. So yeah, and I mean, I mentioned it quickly, but many times you want to take the same data many different places.
Mm-hmm.
So, you might need it on that SQL Server environment that I just described, but maybe you're looking to do AI kind of things and you want to get a copy into something like Snowflake at the same time. I mean, you can do all of that as well. So yeah, very, very flexible that way.
Yeah, and Vince, I wanted to ask a little bit about one of the advantages of our architecture, which comes up a lot, and we see in, whether they've had trouble implementing something like a change data capture or they have kind of a manual process. But one of the things I know just from, my background that's a big deal is being able to operate in that online window, even if it's asynchronous, being able to update that data incrementally, which you touched on, every second, every 5 seconds, because it doesn't need to be completely synchronous, particularly for the reporting. It just needs to be, near real time. So can you just talk a little bit more about our architecture, and which allows us to operate in both the online window or, of course, batch as well? But and that's part of I think we take some steps out of that process for most people, right? Because of the access that PropelZ has.
Yeah, no, and absolutely, that's true. And and let me be clear. If you were trying to write, let's say a business application that wanted to do, let's say a SQL query against the target database, and at the same time in that same transaction, go look up a record on the mainframe in a VSAM file, and you needed to guarantee that those were both exactly synchronized. There's no possibility that one's updated and the other hasn't been. then you need real-time synchronization for that. You need something more than what we provide. We find that that use case, in fact, honestly, I've never heard anybody with that use case. Everybody has the use case where even if it's business transactions, it's all one or all the other. I'm always operating against my mainframe data, or I'm operating against data on some target database, or one side or the other is kind of a read-only lookup. I don't have to worry about transactional guarantees there of consistency. So once we take that out of the picture, all of a sudden, as Dusty, exactly as you said, an asynchronous approach makes a lot more sense. To solve the problem I'm talking about, imagine you had a mainframe transaction of some sort and needed to update a record. To have the kind of integrity you're describing, you would have to update that record on the mainframe, transmit the change to the target, and not allow that transaction to end until you were sure that both the mainframe data and the target data were synchronized properly. That's a tall order. It means that instead of banging away at VSAM files, for instance, with whatever throughput you could get there, now all of a sudden I've got to have networks, I've got to have commits being done on a remote database, I've got to handle all sorts of things about, suppose this one got updated and that one didn't get updated. I mean, you need a two-phase commit protocol for that. I mean, that's a tall order. And as I said, if you had that need, you don't have much choice. You're gonna have to do that. But to drive reporting, or BI, or create AI models with whatever data, I mean, usually you don't have that issue. So our approach works in a really different way. What we do is we understand the content of the file that we're dealing with, and we use basically it's cryptographic methods, signatures and so forth, so that we can go back and look at that data at any point in time and very efficiently pick out, here are the records that have changed, here are the records that have been added, here are the records that have been deleted, and on and on and on that way. And then what we do through PropelZ is, when you're running in the incremental mode, that's all you need to synchronize between the source and the target. We don't have to send, here is a whole copy of that maybe enormous input file. We just have to send the changes. And that's, first of all, a much, much smaller volume of data over your network. And it's configurable, it's controllable by you guys, and it doesn't have to be the same for everything. I might have a VSAM file that's updated dozens of times a second, maybe. That's a different thing than I have a VSAM file that gets recreated by a batch job once a day. So, PropelZ can handle either of those, but it's not an all or nothing thing. It's, configure it and use it for the, for the right reasons, depending on what your needs are. And both can exist, side by side. You have as many of those as you need to. So, a lot really just comes down to that. It's a whole lot more practical. It's easy to get started. And as I said, the whole process, the way we do it, is fault tolerant. If there were to be, let's say, an hour-long network outage, when your network comes back online, what PropelZ will do is just assume that it hadn't seen any updates during that time, and it'll find all the changes since whatever the last update was, and bring the source and target back into sync that way. So it's very resilient that way. It's very easy to guarantee that certainly there could be delay if your networks are down, but it's not the kind of thing like that first example I used, where that online transaction that tried to update a record is just kind of sitting there dangling, waiting for an answer. In our case, that stuff just keeps going with no impact at all, Dusty. was your point, you can run this 24/7 and there's very little impact to other workloads here.
Yeah, exactly. That was one of the things that, you know, when you first reviewed this architecture with me, that was something that really jumped out. And again, just from my past history as being a customer, that's a big deal. Just kind of how it worked within your online window and your batch window. So Vince, let's talk a little bit about the targets then. And I mean, we talked about the databases and JDBC, but how do we get it into, and how does that work to go from, you know, rows and columns and actually into your preferred reporting platform?
Yeah, well, so if the reporting platform is a database underneath, and certainly actually all of these are, they there might be a product like Tableau, but it's probably driven by database data. Uh, in that case, really our job is to get to whatever your preferred database is, and sometimes that's a complex choice. Tableau probably supports as many databases as we do. So, you've probably made a strategic bet on SQL Server or Oracle or whatever it is. So, our mission is going to be to get that data into the target database that your reporting platform knows how to deal with. It doesn't have to be that way. One of the cool things about PropelZ is that output stage is actually customizable. So I'm mostly talking kind of the normal thing people do is JDBC transactions to update that target. But it could be, let's say an API model. It's a different topic, but we use that to push data into management tools like Splunk. And in that case, it's not really that we're just writing into the Splunk database. What we're doing is using that row and column data to send that information into the Splunk APIs directly. So, I know this probably gets complicated. So, if you have any questions about that, don't hesitate to reach out to us. I think one of the advantages of working with VirtualZ is we're happy to, consult on these kind of things and, at least make it clear what the options are, which ones, we think are probably more likely to work better and, help you home in on that. But yeah, I mean, that's the real goal here is to get that data into a place where your reporting platform can consume it, whatever that means, honestly. And by the way, it doesn't have to be SQL database. It could be Mongo. It could be a NoSQL database. It could be some type of big data environment, a key value store, that type of thing. As long as there's an interface to it that we can reach from the mainframe, it's possible to push the data there.
Well, Vince, I'm glad you brought up the Splunk example because that's kind of we're seeing a lot of traction in that particular use case where it's not kind of a traditional AI BI tool, but the observability and the observability reporting and auditable records and those types of things are top of mind for a lot of customers. And so I'll just put a plug in there's a demo specifically integrating console messages to Splunk, as well as a demo of PropelZ with Tableau. And what you'll see in those is, they're about 8 to 10 minute demonstrations, but the total elapsed time, and I'm going to toot Vince's horn about kind of the simplicity of install and configuration. The Tableau example from install to pushing that very complex VSAM file into a MySQL database and then presenting that data in Tableau under an hour in real elapsed time end to end. And so you can kind of see the simplicity and power that we can bring to this. as well as you can kind of see that in the Splunk example as well. So check those demonstrations out. They're right on our website at virtualzcomputing.com, and you can, along with the demonstrations for our other products as well. So I'll just mention, we have a great partner network here that have looked at this problem overall and have, active engagements with their customers where we're helping them, particularly with the data movement or some strategic consulting as well, as Vince mentioned. That's not our goal to be an end-to-end services company, but we're glad to provide our deep expertise where it makes sense in those engagements. And so this is just an example. And then, if it's not apparent that, it's a partner that we have, our partner network is very extensive. We have relationships with just about every system integrator and consultant out there as well. So we're happy to work through that with your preferred service provider. Just a note about, again, kind of bringing this full circle is, well, how much is this really going to cost? Is it really an efficiency? And so, yeah, if you look at the commercial market in this space, I think we're positioned pretty well. PropelZ is $50,000 per year, and that includes those 5 JDBC drivers that we package, but you can bring your own driver, or we're happy to test and certify additional drivers for a very small uplift. So $50,000, unlimited use, unlimited data, unlimited LPARs, and those 5 drivers. If you have the Splunk use case or some observability platform with that real-time streaming capability, there's a small uplift to that, but you can kind of see by our pricing metric, it's not going to break the bank, and it's certainly less expensive than every other commercial product that we know on the market. All right, I think we covered all of these. So data-driven agility, Vince, you covered a lot of those things very well. We talked about scalability. We can run it across many copies or LPARs to get that scale that you need. Seamless data integration. This is truly no-code data integration. So you're just doing a little bit configuration about how you want your output data to go into the preferred database or target that Vince discussed, and then cost savings. And then one thing we didn't really touch it on is part of being able to run as many copies as you want is that PropelZ is also zIIP eligible workloads. So you don't even need to take general processing across a lot of those LPARs. You could run those copies in your zIIP engine. Vince, I think we see a minimum of 90% of offload to the zIIP engine, often higher than that. So huge advantages to running PropelZ for your data movement. All right. Vince, anything else you wanted to add on kind of advantages or anything that I missed?
No, I think you covered it pretty well. I think I mean, we probably didn't do enough justice to the cost advantages here, but it's not just the zIIP MIPS. It's many of these legacy reporting tools are just outrageously expensive, and sometimes there is no other choice. Sometimes there is no non-mainframe version of whatever, so you're locked in to whatever it is, EasyTreeve or SAS or whatever it happens to be. And I don't mean to pick on anybody. I'm just saying this is one case where a lot of times we talk to customers thinking about moving workloads to other platforms, and they tend to focus on their own applications, and they can see a path. I take my COBOL, I take the source code to another platform, I run it in an environment like Micro Focus or one of those kinds of products there, and that part I can sort of see that. But what do you do for all the stuff in your processes that aren't your own applications? The reporting tools and all of these other things. Sometimes that's a pretty enormous problem in its own right. So, being able to get that data where you need it in a format that just about any tool can work on. I mean, unfortunately, you still have that issue of how do you convert the software itself. But, most people I know would way rather use Tableau or Power BI versus, or even things like Crystal reports, and I mean there's so many good solutions in that space. I'd rather use that than some clunky, ancient, crusty old mainframe reporting tool. So it's in that modernization space. Yes, it's really important that there's cost savings there and all of that, but it's also kind of a liberating thing. It's an agility thing that lets you use modern tools where you really want to use those modern tools. So yeah, I think this is something that a lot of sites face in a lot of different ways. But yeah, it's an important thing, especially if you're looking at migrating an app off of the mainframe or any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, let's face it, right? They have those other platforms in all these enterprises, right? So it is bifurcated between the mainframe and, the rest of their environment. So it just most people are trying to get that data unified, and reporting unified so they can have that single pane of glass and do it at a um, much more
Yeah,
timely
yeah.
sequence as well, right? They're not
Well,
waiting for an overnight batch window in particular.
and as you said, skills get to be an important part of this. If I've
Yeah.
got a relational database, probably anybody could figure out how to run, Tableau against that, or whatever it is. If I've got to kind of get in line and go ask somebody to do a custom thing because it's a VSAM file that's sitting on my mainframe. I mean, I used to have that experience personally. Uh, before we did VirtualZ. I mean, if I wanted some custom report, the data happened to be on the mainframe, it might take months for me to get the data that I wanted to see. And it's ultimately, there aren't that many people who know how to do that sort of thing on the mainframe. They're busy, and being able to open that up and leverage different kind of talent feels like a huge victory if you go down that path.
Yeah, I mean, reporting is super important, but when you have to make decisions between, your mainframe skills going towards reporting and, exporting files and ETL activities and more mission critical operations and applications, that becomes a pretty compelling decision to make, when you can make that decision. Now, it hasn't been that easy in the past, but the market is evolving, and we want to help with making that transition to, um, for people to become more efficient in this space. So, okay, Vince, anything else before I?
No, I think we're good. I think it's been a good call.
Okay. I'll just mention we've got tons of resources. So, blogs on just about any topic you can imagine across all of our products, which are 4 products now. Um, Demos on demand for each of those products, which are super helpful. If you want to try any of our products, we're happy to do that. That's no cost for those evaluation and test periods. And then just keep your eyes open for, we're going to be at Share, and there's going to be a really cool demo at Share. So if you're going to Share, please join us there, and hopefully you'll attend our session. And then other webinars, we're pretty consistent on our webinars and our webinar topics. And then again, tons of resources on social media, like our podcasts, et cetera. So. All right, Vince, thanks for another session today, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.